Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today, When Culture Kills Innovation and What to Do. My name is Dale Yarborough. I'm Director of Marketing here at Imaginatik, and Chris Townsend, who is our Chief Marketing Officer, will be conducting the webinar itself. So what Chris is going to be walking through today are just some of the challenges that culture presents within your organization when you're trying to be innovative, and then some solutions to help address some of these issues. I just want to let everybody know that we will be recording this webinar and we'll have it distributed out to you via email within 24 hours after the broadcast. And probably more importantly is we'd love to have questions that we can address at the end of the webinar. So you should see a section within the webinar tool for you to enter your questions as the webinar is going along. Feel free to submit those as early in the webinar as you'd like, and towards the end of the webinar, towards the end of the broadcast, we will address as many of those questions as we can. So with that, I'm going to change presenter controls over to Chris.
Thank you, Dale. And I believe, let me know if you can see my screen.
We look good.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Dale. Thanks, everyone, for being on the line. This is a big topic, and we're going to try and do it justice in an hour here today, but obviously it goes pretty deep. So let's jump right in. The first thing is a bit of an admission. We should be clear that culture and innovation have been part of an interplay for a long time. And you could say it goes back at least as far as the invention of the wheel. We've had culture, we've had innovation, but that has meant different things over time, how those two forces interplay with each other, and what that means for all of us and how we behave. So today we live in a digitally enabled, very networked world where the forces of culture and innovation take on the same patterns, but maybe a new meaning and suggest different things. So what I'm going to do today is to try to place these eternal issues within the context of the modern age in which Imaginatik has done our work for almost 20 years and what we've observed along the way. Then as now, you could say there are three perennial issues between innovation and the workplace culture. And I'll describe them here briefly, and then we'll return to these throughout today's broadcast. And those would be internal politics, business as usual, and hierarchical thinking. None of these should be a shock to anyone, but unpacking what they really mean and how they manifest and what to do about them is a very large and rich topic. I'll describe briefly the lessons that we have learned over the years that form sort of concepts, guiding concepts, and then we'll go and walk through them a little bit in more detail. The first of these corresponds primarily to the internal politics issue, and that's one of initial cultural resistance to anything new you're trying to do. This image here is practitioners of the Japanese martial art Aikido. And Aikido is famous for being about self-defense and primarily based around how to use the attacker's energy to your advantage. So one of the first insights that we'll share today is when you get cultural resistance to innovation efforts, that's actually a very good thing, because that is energy that can be used and directed. It's much better than not having that. The question is, do you have the right techniques to be able to use that energy to your advantage to spearhead innovations that really matter? The second concept is one of what to do when you get to the shoreline, and this ties to the way to combat business as usual thinking. Everyone has a comfort zone. By analogy, for most of us, that's walking on land. Innovation inherently, if it's going to produce valuable effects, means doing things new and different. And that will require, to some degree at least, new skills, new habits and ways of working, and new ways of thinking. And so if you've started to overcome that initial resistance and started to use it to your advantage, Then there's the question of how to channel it to achieve effect. And our well-entrenched cultural habits of how we do things in that business as usual fashion can get in the way. So the second major insight that's guided our work for a long time now, and hopefully we can share some of that today, is how do you create a new comfort zone where instead of walking on the same island that you've inhabited for a long time, you can actually row across the ocean as well. And building the comfort zone around that way of working is really important. The third one is really about getting everyone involved. Again, there are plenty of innovations that can be done in an isolated silo or ivory tower, but I would argue that the ones that will really add serious value to your business will take a lot of hands working on them. And in fact, without the active participation of a whole number of key actors over time, you will have trouble rolling it out and seeing value in the end. So there is a persistent cultural habit that most of us have to preserve the established order and hierarchy, which, as you start to develop new things to do and develop, can get in the way of having them achieve full impact. And so we'll talk a bunch about what's the right way to turn that cultural energy to your advantage by flipping the dynamic and having all the folks who need to be implicated in your success help you drive the effort and sign up, raise their hand proactively. This webinar is going to be 3 stories. So we have 3 chapters to our message today, and each one of them will talk about these 3 issues and give a case study that focuses mostly on those. So the first story is going to be around those internal politics that can kill innovation from the very beginning, and how to turn that upfront cultural resistance into a fulcrum for change. Second, business as usual as something that actually impedes innovation when you get to work, and how to create that new comfort zone that opens up fresh thinking. And then finally, the hierarchies we're all used to, which preserve a very needed social order in the enterprise, but also can be a roadblock to developing and implementing innovations. And we'll talk about a story that shows how you can start to invert that social pyramid to your advantage. Just a word about storytelling before we get into each of these 3 chapters. Culture is a funny topic because everyone likes to talk about the successes we had at the end, but the internecine, under-the-covers struggles typically get swept under the rug and sanitized, and that's for a very good reason, because we all struggle with that in our own ways, every single one of us, and they're uncomfortable to talk about. And so what we're going to do today is preserve the content. And these are real stories taken from Imaginatik's work with real clients over the years, but sanitize them enough essentially to protect the innocent, and hopefully still tell a really good story that illustrates what we've learned in our 2 decades of experience. So with that, first story about internal politics and creating leverage where previously you just had resistance. First, a general principle about how this perennial human dynamic has manifested in this day and age, certainly in our work, and that often is a tussle between what we have come to call operations and innovation. I think all of us that work in any kind of corporate environment are familiar with the picture on the left and the predictable, rigorous, reliable structure that helps you gain efficiency and scale and profitability and so on. We also, I think many of you on the line will have an appreciation for the fact that that is often the very thing that stands in the way of innovation and forms a kind of cultural resistance that can be quite political and very immediate when you try and change things. Ultimately, I would propose what needs to happen is to start to build acceptance for a culture and a way of working that looks more like the circle on the right, that is inherently collaborative and creative and networked and therefore innovative. But doing so in a way that doesn't overturn the operational structure that helps you stay at scale and speed and efficiency. And this dynamic plays out a lot in the work we've seen, and you can find it in ways big and small across an organization. We'll talk about a very salient example of this with a political struggle at the senior leadership level, which is sort of the biggest stage of them all when it comes to overcoming this cultural barrier. So this story is taken from an American restaurant business, a franchise company, and they were operating at the time in an environment where one particular competitor had surged forward and was stealing a lot of market share, and doing so with a new and different way of serving customers. This franchise, who had been a market leader, was seeing their share erode, and this became enough of a problem at the board level that it was determined they needed to innovate their way out of this problem. And so a VP of innovation was hired and given the mandate to help coordinate the organization's ability to stay in the game through innovation. Everyone believed in this. They all knew it was a critical imperative. Yet once that decision was made, problems started to creep in, and that's largely because when you start to innovate, it begins to potentially upset the established order in operations that have made the company successful for a long time. And so over time, innovation came to build a bit of a silo, doing things that then they had lots of resistance, turning into operational wins that actually added value in the marketplace itself. And so this led to an impasse that started to grow worse over time, and it was clear that the entire mission was in jeopardy. And that's where we got involved. And the first thing that we thought was understanding this organization as we became acquainted with them was sticking to first principles as a way of finding common ground. So obviously there was an imperative to innovate. The question was just removing the roadblocks, in this case some political battles that were quite entrenched, in order to free that up. So in this particular case, starting with first principles was about having a candid assessment of how innovative the company was today. They already knew they needed to be innovative, but where were they starting from? And then from that, looking at where, based on benchmarks in our work from different industries and lots of different companies, for various dimensions of organizational structure, strategy, process, and tools, etc., how they compared. Through this work, we began to at least have a baseline from which to have a serious conversation about, well, what do we do now? What does the roadmap look like to become an organization with deeper, more rooted, more successful innovation capabilities? And that led to a series of projects that, through often contentious discussion, necessary but contentious discussion, C-level leaders of innovation and operations could both agree were important. Neither may have thought it was the most important project at first, but both agreed this would be a very good step in the right direction. And from there, it allowed that team to start building the kind of on-the-ground teamwork that could open up new levers and new areas to innovate over time, to the point where they are now tackling the real innovation threat out there in the marketplace that they originally perceived. But there was a need to get on the same page, start with projects that mattered to everyone so they could build trust in the execution, and then take it from there. So that's our first chapter about how to, just one way of overcoming some of the entrenched political cultural barriers to innovation that manifest over time. And just to return to that principle again, with this one in particular, there is a real need to find a way of using that resistance to your advantage, and actually looking for it. I mean, this is one thing we advise fairly often, is actively seeking pockets of resistance, because that can give you clues for how to, on the ground, start taking meaningful steps that will become more integrated over time. With that, I'd like to move into our second chapter, and that goes into the business as usual problem. And this one is related, but often downstream of the initial political resistance at a cultural level. And that one is once you have what seems like agreement on a path forward and real meaningful buy-in on the ground, you have to actually go and start innovating. And as some have observed before, coming up with new ideas is easy. Coming up with viable concepts that can work in the trenches is very hard. We have found that once operations and innovation start working together in meaningful ways for the business, all of a sudden innovation projects that seemed very easy and could go very fast become a lot harder because you run into the wall of market reality. One of the natural cultural instincts is to do what you know how to do very well, which in this graph here essentially means staying inside the confines of your organization today, which is the big light bulb. Often this seems like a great thing to do, and many ideas have been proposed and implemented that look like shining light bulbs, but really don't move the needle for the innovation that really needs to happen. And there's often a lot of cultural antipathy to venturing forth at any meaningful distance from the island that is your business today. So a story that puts this into relief was a global apparel business that we worked with a little while ago, who did have relatively good alignment at the senior level for the need to innovate and the imperative to work together from the top down to make it happen. They were contending with a number of changes in their industry, from consumer demands in fashion and what clothing really meant in their lifestyle, as some of these new movements for wearables and fitness come online, new technologies, and a fast-changing competitive landscape. So there was a need to innovate in a lot of different ways, not least of which in new products and new ways of reaching their customers. The problem was not the will to innovate nor people's buy-in, but how do we actually start doing it? So a year or two's worth of innovation efforts led to nothing remarkable. A lot of effort, a lot of alignment, but not a lot to show for it in terms of actual results at the end. And of course, over time, this lack of results breeds a degree of a lack of belief among those who've been involved, and increasingly starts to put people at odds with each other and try and argue for another way of doing things that they may not quite have. What we have learned in this type of situation, and it comes from a lot of different experiences, this one, just one notable example, is to find a way of creating a new space where new patterns of thinking and new ways of acting together can be formed, where in a safe way at first, the old habits, be they thinking patterns or ways of executing, can be broken down so that you can actually do things that are truly innovative and will make a real impact on the business. In this case, it was a series of workshops, which we do often for clients in different scenarios where we see the business as usual phenomenon creep into their chances of success, in which we could spend some time, which is again often contentious, often difficult, frequently awkward upfront, to create a mind space for folks in a room and virtually that really is just different. And often it feels weird to be having conversations far outside of what the operational constraints are today, but over time, the various techniques in design thinking, developmental and lateral thinking, and analogous worlds and new connection making can help open up new possibilities that never would have been considered, much less implemented before. So with this one, the net result was that instead of having feet firmly planted on well-trod ground, the client was able to begin the process of learning how to row in the ocean and being able to connect up to new islands of products and market access and growth. That's a story that's continuing to play out today, and it comes with increasingly rapidity and success. So that's the second cultural barrier that we run into all the time. And I want to stress again, the general principle here is overcoming that business as usual thinking and not being fooled into the fallacy that lots of ideas in the pipeline will inevitably lead to the kind of change in results that you're really going to need. As with the previous story, what I've showed you here is just one example of the toolkit for actually accomplishing that goal. Depending upon the scenario and the factors at play, one or a number of different techniques might be the right one. And for this, as with the other two cultural barriers, I'd be happy to talk to any of you later about other tools and techniques that would work. I just, obviously we need to keep things moving in the interest of time here. That brings me to our third and final story about these various cultural barriers to innovation, and that's around the entrenched power of the hierarchies we all have in our organizations. We all have them. They're necessary. They're productive and beneficial. But without finding ways to invert the social pyramid, force innovation success without completely destroying the established order by any stretch, you may not be able to really achieve the success in the end either.
Chris, can I ask you to pause for one moment, please?
Yes,
I just want to remind everybody that we will be taking questions at the end of the broadcast. So if you want to enter any questions within the appropriate question chat box there, we will be addressing them at the end of the webinar. Back to you, Chris. Sorry.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Dale. So to illustrate the concept of hierarchical thinking, we have found in our work that even in examples like the previous one, where for a brief moment in a certain group, it's possible to create focused, powerful, passionate engagement around an innovation objective or a project. And that's great, and it's a good first step. However, doing things persistently and being successful as an innovative company means doing that often. In the hierarchical organizations we all work in, even the flatter ones, we all have a day job, and making sure that everyone can be engaged in the right ways and contribute to innovation success ends up being critical for follow-through and making your innovation mill turn as fully as possible. So there's really a question of how to turn on these pockets of light and how to extend them and make them sustainable over time. The story I'm going to tell here is about a global R&D organization that was very heavy on science and engineering for their business. It drives their success. And the particular problem was in upstream R&D, so more theoretical, more fundamental, very critical to innovation success overall. And like many science and engineering heavy organizations, this company hired many bright young PhDs. And because it was the advanced research part of the global R&D organization, they have quite a remit to do new and different things, to come up with new technologies that can be used for the business, both as products and otherwise. And they hired really great talent to do that. And so they certainly didn't have any problem with the innovations and operations clash that had been resolved, certainly within their remit. And they hired people and had a regular way of working that was all about innovation. Yet, they struggled with getting the most out of the talent they had hired, and began to see of young, bright PhDs not being fully engaged in their work, coming into work and essentially punching a time card and leaving, and often leaving the organization altogether. So we came in to help a bit with this, and what we did was help them find a place where the junior scientists had a voice that was meaningful and could lead directly to better success for the overall research agenda. And so, as many organizations struggle with this problem where the senior leaders of R&D effectively set the agenda for new research projects, sometimes on an annual basis, sometimes more or less frequently. And it can easily lead to an overly entrenched hierarchy in which a lot of the creative thinking of what new projects to take on and why they might be important from young, ambitious scientists just doesn't have a place. There is no seat at the table. So with this organization, what we did is worked with them to launch an idea challenge specifically designed to get the fresh thinking from bright young scientists out there as part of the conversation in terms of research planning. As with the other two stories, this is contentious at first. It's not easy, but there are ways to make sure that the overall success is achieved. And of course, at the end, no one can argue with success. Since the initial effort to start to create this parallel space for young talent to have a real material voice in that planning process without upending all the established order, which served a very useful function, it has now become a regular part of the way their organization works and has helped them both retain talent and better leverage the talent they have. So again, that is one technique that we have seen useful among many. Often these get customized in different ways for specific scenarios, but hopefully the general principle is clear and a basic view on the ways that you can start to tackle that. In this case, it's about making sure that people can raise their hand to help with innovation every day in the ways that they can add value from their skills and expertise and the job roles they perform. So what I'd like to do is just spend a little bit of time as sort of an epilogue to these stories, talking about the bigger picture again in these cultural barriers overall and how they impact innovation. And the message here is that, yes, innovation is hard. Every time you innovate, you run into these barriers, and they have to be overcome, and you have to use that energy to your advantage. However, each time you innovate, you have changed a little piece of the culture, but culture is very persistent and can last for a very long time. And that culture change over time that can lead to ongoing sustainable innovation efforts repeatedly is harder still, and really takes one step after another. We have seen over the years the ways in which culture manifests, and ultimately with each example in your organization, like those we've shared in our 3 story chapters here today, each time you achieve a success like that, you're starting to chip away or reform, use that energy in different ways, the underlying culture that is very strong and persistent and can survive past leadership changes and even strategy changes. And those are mental models, values and beliefs, attitudes and habits, and then they can be very entrenched. We have also noticed that working with these deeply rooted pieces of culture on whatever type of innovation activity or project you're working on at the time can be best shaped and redirected in positive directions if you can operate in what we refer to as the 3 spaces of innovation. The mind one in particular we've talked about already today, especially in the second story, around creating a new conceptual space for thinking and acting differently. The acting gets into the physical space, and virtual ways of collaborating, which are omnipresent today throughout any modern organization, are also really important. Ignoring one of these 3 spaces means you're missing the entrenched culture and the ways it manifests in critical aspects of workplace life. That if you don't start to use the energy there and direct it towards innovative ends, will eventually come back and create a barrier again. And it really is a journey over time. So each of these successes in overcoming these different cultural barriers will be fought repeatedly, and each time you fight them and win, then you will come a little bit closer to unlocking the larger puzzle. And this is our view that we use a lot in our work to help describe how that journey over time happens, with, in the lower left, a few pockets of light where cultural barriers can be turned to everyone's advantage. Then they can become more numerous and replicated, and then eventually more entrenched until they're part of daily life. And those deeper pillars of your organizational culture have been shifted into a better and more permanent place. I suppose a lot of today's message is not happy, joyous news on the face of it, in that we all know this is very hard, and it does take time and repeated success to make a permanent dent in culture, and ultimately to change it into something very beneficial and positive. And so I want to leave everyone with my prepared remarks with a parting thought, and that is that we all, individually and as teams and as organizations, have the potential to be innovative. We all have brains. We all think. We all have at least some ability to be creative. It's really just a question of unlocking that. And furthermore, to the extent that we all have that ability, we all want to use it. No one likes having a skill dormant. The question is how to work with those cultural barriers at first to unlock the right way for our nascent inherent creativity and innovation to come out in productive ways for everyone. And so hopefully you, like us, can go on this journey over time of rewiring habits and mindsets, and ultimately the culture, so that innovation can persist and thrive across the organization. And so with that, I'll take a step back. Thanks for listening, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Okay, so we have a few questions that have come in. The first one, how can implementing an innovation management platform help to start expediting an innovation everywhere culture?
That's a great question. So really, the innovation management platform is a piece of the puzzle, and you know, specifically, culture will always have things that it grafts upon, right? So you know, culture manifests in terms of process and system and ways of working, and implementing a platform to guide the way in which you innovate, or to be the home for innovation, can be the substrate upon which these progressive campaigns to overcome cultural barriers can be waged, I think, is the best way to think about it. So whenever implementing an innovation management platform, it's important to take into account the culture you have today, how these barriers will manifest, and therefore what kind of program to launch, how to use the platform both at the beginning and progressively over time to achieve wins while starting to turn over the culture as you go.
Okay, here's another question. Is innovation required across the entire organization? Would it not help to let somebody, or only you know, sections of the organization be those operators of innovation?
That's a very good question. Yes. The way in which innovation and operations plays together manifests in ways large and small. So there are many companies that have a dedicated innovation unit that is engaged exclusively in moonshots or disruptive bets of one kind or another. In many cases, they will have their own operations and will operate fairly or completely autonomously from the mainline organization, and that's fine. For that kind of goal, it can be the right way to go. And in that case, then you're building the operational structure around innovation as you go, as that gets launched. You know, then the tension between innovation and operations will creep in in the same way that as successful startups become corporations, examples like Facebook or Google from the recent past, Amazon's another one. Eventually, that separate innovation program, if it's successful, will develop its own operational antibodies and culture, and that same cultural struggle will persist if you want to keep innovating. Other organizations have a blended mix or will tend to operate in ways that are directly relevant in the business today, which we would think of as more incremental or adjacent bets and plays for innovation. And if so, then it will manifest more like our first story today. There are all kinds of shades of gray along that spectrum, and how autonomous versus how connected, and how much of its own master versus a supporting force for the organization you want to have really depends upon where your organization is in terms of its strategy, what industry forces you're playing with, what kinds of culture you have to deal with, and the role you think that innovation should play over time in overall success of the company. And that's a rather different discussion.
Great. Here's an interesting one. Can you talk a little bit about the role virtual communities can play in creating a culture of innovation?
Yeah, great topic. So virtual certainly is one of those three spaces of innovation, and I heard the word communities in there. So there are a lot of different ways to unpack that. I'll just try to do a few right now. Again, I think there's a lesson kind of like implementing an innovation management platform, which is it is a scalable tool, but it is not the complete answer. And part of that is because obviously the ways in which we innovate are both virtual and live. So parts of culture and innovation happen in meetings, they happen in conversations, they happen out in the marketplace, they happen in the laboratory, and not all of that is virtual. But of course, more of innovation and more of work happens digitally than ever before, and that trend only seems to continue. Communities in particular can be very good as a hotbed of inverting the social pyramid. So we have seen communities of practice modified for innovation mandates in particular work very, very well, in which they can be embedded directly in daily goals and daily work in your organization. So there are things that people do every day, whether it's in R&D or in sales or anywhere in between, customer support, where part of their job touches on innovation. So someone in customer support may encounter difficult service requests from customers, which really demand innovation. It's not something the company can support today. Providing virtual communities for folks like that to help solve problems together can lead to rich fodder that can be mined for sometimes even game-changing innovations. So virtual communities specifically as a tool to help with moving the needle on innovation and culture can be very valuable because they can connect directly to people's day jobs and also mine the grist that can connect right into the innovations you really want to achieve in the end. I don't know if that really addresses the question, but if the question asker would like to follow up with something more specific, if I didn't hit the right topic, feel free.
Okay, Chris, I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit, and hopefully I'm retaining the main concept of the question here. But you've talked a lot about culture within your organization itself. But what dimensions do a company's for example, suppliers add to that cultural issue? So some people outside the organization that are very close to the organization, I suppose.
Right, that is part of the factors that creates and shapes culture over time, and certainly can have an effect on innovation. I'll give a general answer at first, and then see if I can give a specific answer based on where I think the question might be going. I think innovation success depends upon involving as many of the different stakeholders and actors in your company's success as possible. And it's hard at the beginning to cast the net very broadly on who gets involved, because it's just a lot to manage, and there are lots of cultural barriers in terms of different stakeholders and ecosystem actors that will present themselves. And it's nice over time to neutralize and turn to an advantage specific cultural barriers or specific stakeholders and how they can get involved, rather than trying to do them all at the beginning. Suppliers are certainly an important piece of that puzzle. For many companies, they form the bedrock of how you develop your solutions or that which you make money from, especially if you're in the middle or the downstream part of some industry value chain. And obviously, suppliers will often be looking for ways that they can help you innovate, so that they can enhance their share and find new ways to capture value in the ecosystem. So I guess I would just say that they play an important role, and figuring out how to create the right programs for the right objectives you have to involve them is very important. And a lot of the tools that we have learned to adopt and use with our clients over time, and a lot of the different processes and governance models can help with that. And that's I mean, I could spend an hour talking about that, and it's probably beyond the scope. But I mean, again, to the question asker, I would say if there's anything specifically within that sphere that you're wrestling with or would like to dive into, I'm happy to address that specifically.
Great. So we have time for a few more. So here's one. Changing culture from the top down can be easier than from the bottom up. So how would you help drive the culture change when senior management is still in that business as usual attitude? And there's a few people at the lower levels helping to drive that change upward.
Oh, great question. Great question. I think the first thing that's important to say is ultimately innovation and helping with culture change to make innovation work better is both top down and bottom up, and it's got to be an and, not an or. That's ultimately what needs to happen, right? It's not just the senior people that own it and drive it, nor is it entirely grassroots. It has to be both together. But to the question's point, I think very rarely does it start out that way, and very rarely can it be that way at the beginning, because you're dealing with the organization you have. So in the case where senior management is in business as usual thinking mode, and the pockets of light in your organization are really at the grassroots or front lines level, I would say that the best mindset to be in is to find ways of proving value locally that you can start to scale and bootstrap over time. Because what you don't want to do in most cases is try and start a revolution, right? Usually that means that you're not turning the cultural barriers energy to your advantage. You're trying to address it head on, which usually is not a good strategy. So I think the general approach would be to try and create the best success within whatever constraints you have to operate in, right? So if management isn't totally bought in or wants things done a certain way, try and achieve those while really making a difference on the ground. And the more you have success in whatever constrained local way you start out with doing, you can look for ways to leverage that onto a wider platform or stage over time. And then of course you end up getting into a bit of the political battles that we discussed in the first story. But really I think the first goal needs to be to do good things that gain attention. And once you get that attention, then you will start to incur some of that direct cultural resistance from above that now that you're on that stage, you can start to turn to your advantage. I'm sorry that's a fairly general answer. Again, if I could talk for hours with different stories, but I want to keep it relatively succinct, and more specific questions within that I'm happy to answer as well.
Great. Once again, I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit, but what are your thoughts around rewarding behavior within the organization and the culture in terms of soft benefits versus hard benefits? I guess the soft benefits could be something like a lunch with key executives of the company versus hard dollars to help reward that shift, in culture to, start providing innovative ideas?
Yeah, that's another really good question. Comes up all the time. Um, I'm gonna gloss over a fair amount of the easy things to say about rewards and recognition and how it's a mixed blessing, and I'm gonna assume that I think most, if not all, the folks on this line have an appreciation for that. Rewards it's recognition in particular is very important. It matters to people. Pride is a powerful driver of behaviors and attitudes. And I think with a lot of this culture stuff, there is no one right answer. I hope that's one thing that comes through in the whole presentation today. There is no one right answer, and how you think about using different tools depends upon the situation. So, we have seen work very well, reward and recognition setups where there are annual awards ceremonies to really honor people who have done great work. And if you do that, one of the keys to success will be choosing the right ways and reasons to reward people that may be based on tangible, quantifiable success, or it may be based on how they helped bring teams together and improve cultural acceptance of innovation, for example. It depends, a lot of how you choose to set that up depends upon the existing ways in which your organization tends to lionize successes and tends to gossip and share information with each other, both officially and implicitly. Other ways that we've seen work very well involve nothing to do with big award ceremonies, because some organizations don't do that, and it would feel very weird and foreign. And so instead, it's more at a manager by manager level, or it's maybe just a call from the CEO, or a lot of other things that are more embedded and more implicit. It's also worth noting that some of these things that can work at the outset, I'll use the sort of nominal awards as an example, also can create specific patterns in how innovation is recognized that later can hold you back, because people get too used to that pattern, which incentivizes a certain kind of behavior, which may be very beneficial for you at first, but if you can't then create a new and parallel comfort zone for them around other things to value in their efforts, you may get stuck again. So, with rewards and recognition, not only is the solution you start with different for many organizations, but then as you go along, you're going to want to layer different ones that work in different ways into more of a sophisticated tapestry where, if you're not an awards type of organization, then you might become one later as part of the larger program.
Great. Okay, so we're coming up on the bottom of the hour. Let's take one more question. I think this can be answered in a number of different ways, but who should be the main initiator for cultural change, and what teams or units should that person be using for support in starting to develop that cultural change?
I think it can be any team, really. It can be any team, and the real characteristic is it a team that has the right characteristics of leadership and courage? So and also a need and a reason to push the envelope. So we've seen the cultural pocket of innovation begin in everything from marketing and R&D and product, where you might expect it, to HR, to customer support, to legal, to I think some are more natural homes, especially if they, marketing is an example of that. There's a lot of marketers whose job is to push the envelope and find new sources of growth. Sometimes that can lead to a bit of inherent innovation arrogance, if you will, where they think they're already innovative and may not be willing to actually push further or help the larger organization become that way. In other cases, it makes it very easy for a part of the marketing or product organization to be the standard bearer. In other cases, it can actually be really great to have a function or a part of the company or even a line of business that's usually not considered innovative to be the flag bearer. And part of that is because it makes for great storytelling and virality inside your organization. If these guys, who everyone normally thinks of as being the curmudgeons who are not innovative, if they're doing it, then by golly, everyone else should too. And also, there's a lot of cases where the most impetus. I mean, at the end of the day, it all comes down to passion and willingness. Starting to turn the innovation flywheel, starting to confront and turn into an advantage those cultural barriers is not easy. It takes work and persistence, and of course the value eventually is high. So whoever does stand up and take the charge first will be ones who usually either have a lot to lose or a lot to gain, or both, and have the right conditions to want to stand up and to want to persist through adversity. And so that really depends. And my advice to any of you innovation leaders out there is just be as savvy as you can for quietly meeting folks around your organization and looking for those signs of a team or a division or a unit or a person even that exhibits all the markers of that one who will be a standard bearer with you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Chris. I just want to remind everybody on the line that we will be sending out a recording of this webinar via email, and that should be complete within 24 hours after broadcast. So once again, thanks everybody for joining. We hope to see you on future webinars, and just keep an eye out for the recording being sent to your inbox.